Sanibonani Dumelang, good evening and welcome to episode 139 of the Private Property Podcast. I'm your host, Zama Khumalo. It's a Friday edition of the Private Property Podcast. I do hope that those of you who are drinkers were able to get your stock before the boutiques closed. I saw somebody calling them boutiques before they closed, and you all gear up for the weekend. And of course, before we get our weekend started, we always wrap up all things property right here on the Private Property Podcast. And this evening, we're looking at something that I know a lot of you are always keen on, and we're looking at simple tips on planning ahead for your property purchase. So whether you're watching us on, across our social media platforms, from your, Twitter, your Instagram, certainly Facebook with the Top Fan Gangs, or YouTube, welcome to the Private Property Podcast. And we actually did a really great, Q&A earlier on this afternoon on our Facebook page. And we were asking you, if you have questions, we certainly have the answer. So ask us everything that you want to know about getting ready for your property purchase, which is exactly what we're going to be looking at this evening. And we'll certainly also be going through some of the great questions that you sent through. And of course, you're able to also continue sending them throughout the course of our episode this evening. And joining us is somebody who needs no introduction to the Private Property Podcast. I'm sure many of you have already seen him here. Was also, of course, on I think he was on the virtual property show, if I remember correctly. And that's, of course, Grant Smee, who's a director at Epic South Africa. Grant, good evening, and thank you so much for joining us.
Good evening, thank you. What a way to spend a Friday night talking property.
I know. I mean, I always say to people, this is the great way to just wrap up the week. So people who are watching us at home, they've probably already popped open that bottle of champagne or having that beer, whatever it is that you're drinking. This is like the nice way to kickstart your weekend. And after this, then, you can slowly get the party started. And there's quite a lot of property on people's minds, and especially, first-time home buyers or people who've already got that first property and are probably looking at adding that additional property into their property portfolio. And they essentially just want to find out different ways of simplifying their home ownership journey as much as possible. Some people always want to find out, how can I beat the system? The system when it comes to, getting the lowest interest rate possible. I used to love those kinds of conversation of what's the best way to just beat the system to make sure that A, your credit score goes high as quickly as possible, and then B, you're also able to get that, the interest rate quoted to you as low as possible. And I want us to already start going through some of the great questions that we got from viewers at home on our Facebook page. And I think let's perhaps start with this one, because I think sometimes people don't quite know where the starting point is. They've been watching the show, they've been going on privateproperty.co.za, going under the advice section. They probably follow us across different social media platforms and see the great articles that we share, but still don't quite know where to start. And that's a sentiment that certainly comes up when I look at a question here from Troy Ndibuo, who asks, what is actually needed for one to own a property? Let's say I can afford to get one, but what are the other things that are essentially needed?
Yeah, so what are the other things you essentially need? You need to understand that owning property does come firstly with costs. So you need to understand the process of owning a property, how to maintain it, what are the costs associated, because being able to afford your property or afford to buy your property is only one element of the whole process. So buying a property, getting the bond, putting the deposit down, paying your transfer costs, transfer duties, or all the costs associated to buying is only the very first stage, the very first step. You've got another 20 years at least of carrying that property, paying off that bond, understanding your cash flow, paying the levies, paying the maintenance. So first thing first is knowing the cash flow or the expenses around the actual ownership of a property is vitally important for you.
And I think it's also just about, understanding what your needs are, because sometimes it's so easy to think, oh, I want a property, I'm just going to go head first, and not spend a lot of time just doing your research and viewing a lot of properties and just getting a sense of what exactly is out there on the market. And one of the things that you're going to, encounter, and we're already just speaking about it right now, is of course that of interest rates. And there's a great question here coming in from Maisela Mudau, who says, can I negotiate the interest rate of the property I am buying?
Yes, I mean, look, you need to be in a strong position to be able to negotiate if you want to try and get a bank to offer you a very competitive rate. Obviously, the banks all go through their lending cycles, so it certainly is possible to negotiate slightly on the offer that they've made to you, but you need to be coming from a strong position. So either have other offers that are comparable, have a very, very strong credit score and a very strong history. So there are elements that come into the ability for you to negotiate. But the answer is yes, you can. And the easiest way or the way I recommend you go about it is actually using a bond originator such as Uber. And you go to Uber, and Uber will approach most of the banks for you on your behalf with your profile and try and get offers from them. And then they also, fortunately, will go out back and negotiate for you for the best interest rate possible.
And that's Uber. I know a lot of you would have watched 2 weeks ago. We actually had, people from Uber, 2 different guests in the same week from Uber, Samantha, as well as I think it was Chantal, who were both quite, amazing in us understanding, firstly, the service that bond originators essentially have, and how essentially they work for you. Because I think a lot of people sometimes think the service is too good to be true, because how can somebody do all of that? We already know it's a free service. If anything, they get their money from the bank, and so you're not paying them for the service. They do a lot of the legwork for you, even going back and forth, right? And even, I think, advising, and this is one of the reasons why I also encourage people to use bond originators. I've worked with bond originators throughout a lot of the property transactions that I've had, is sometimes they're able to tell you that, look, this particular bank will likely not be too keen on this one, because they know they're dealing with those financial institutions on a day-to-day basis. Sometimes suppose a bank is not looking at a particular area or isn't financing in a particular complex. So they'll be able to essentially help you to say, listen, right now, we know that Bank X is probably not financing in that particular complex. We've seen them, say that they're a bit overexposed, so they're just laying off financing that particular property for a couple of months. So that's the kind of insight that you probably want to be able to get, and you're certainly able to get it when you work with, a credible bond originator. And Uber is certainly one of the bond originators that you are able to reach out to.
Sorry, I just want to add to that quickly, is that the bond originators, although they act for free on your behalf, the one thing they have, which we don't have, or the general consumer doesn't have, is expertise within the financial space. So they understand when a bank says to you, if you go to the bank directly, says to you, no, because of X, Y, Z, you don't know any better, but the bond originators, like you said, they deal with it day in and day out. And if they don't, certainly their management do. And they will say to the bank, no, hold on a minute, you're actually talking nonsense here. And this is a situation, because again, they only make their money if you get an approved bond and you take that bond up. So it's in their best interest to ensure that you get that finance if you're in that position. But on the flip side, they'll be very blunt with you and say to you, look, you're not in a position right now to get finance. And they're not messing around, because there's no benefit for them to tell you you're not going to get finance. So the bond originators play such a vitally important part, a role for first-time buyer particularly because of expertise, but also for an investor because they actually represent you ultimately.
And actually, like how you've just pointed out, that they'll also tell you when you're not in the best position to be getting that home loan facility, because sometimes some people will go and only apply to one financial institution, as opposed to obviously working with a bond originator that goes across, and then their home loan facility, for example, or that facility gets rejected, and you sometimes wonder why. And there could be a whole host of various reasons. Some of them could be because you probably weren't in the best position right at that point for them to extend that loan facility. But another one, and this is something I found, I think I was even tweeting about it the other day, a very interesting stat, Grant, that I found out is oftentimes about 41% of home loan applications that get declined by one bank only get approved by another bank. And if anything, that shows you the why so many of us would probably encourage you to work with bond originators, because they're not applying to one financial institution. So a lot of applicants who apply only to one financial institution, a good 41% of them get rejected, but then their application, when they go to the next financial institution, does get approved. So sometimes it really isn't you as the applicant or your application is bad, but it might just be that particular financial institution and their appetite for extending credit, and especially in that area, because I think it isn't even about you as the individual, it's also about the area and whether the financial institution wants to be, get a bigger chunk of that particular area. So there are a whole host of reasons that your application can get rejected. And oftentimes bond originators are able to say, you're likely not going to be successful, and this is why. And they'll be able to say, in order to get on the right path, these are perhaps some of the things that you should be doing in the next, let's say, 6 to 8 months, or perhaps even a year. Then you're going to be in a better financial position for you to be getting that home loan facility. And of course, to viewers at home, we did ask you this question. We're looking at simple tips on planning ahead for your property purchase. If you have any questions that have to do with what you can do better when it comes to buying yourself that property, you can be a first-time home buyer, or of course, you've already bought that residential property that is your primary residence, and now looking at expanding your portfolio and adding that first investment property, then do send through your questions and comments. And I think also just what have been some of the tips that you have found useful, because I think we sometimes take for granted how other people do something and it worked quite well. I think for me, one of the great sort of tips I would share was, I knew when I started on my home ownership journey that it wasn't just about owning a primary residence. I knew I wanted to go into property investment and own quite a number of properties. And so when I got pre-qualified with a bond originator, I got pre-qualified for, I can't even remember the amount, and I think it may have even been like less than $1 million. Let's round it off to $1 million. And instead of buying one property that was 800,000 or 900,000, I went and bought 2 properties that were still below even the maximum that I essentially could have qualified for. And what that effectively meant that I got into the property space already with the 2 properties. The only caveat with that one is budget appropriately for the transfer fees. Many of you at home have heard me talk about this one, especially the attorney fees, but also be aware of the cost of property ownership. So you're now going to be doing everything in doubles. So it's levies, it's twice. You're paying rates and taxes, it's twice. So just understanding the financials and knowing that worst case scenario, you don't get any tenants for either one of the properties, let's say for the first 2 months, because you're trying to get just used to having a property. Are you able to afford to pay for everything yourself? And if that's a yes, then you've adequately run your numbers. So while it's a great path to choose, it's also one that you must understand the full sort of financial implications of it. And I'm going to go to a question here from Sindisiwe Ndaungumalo, who asks, if I want to buy, say, at the end of January, how soon should I start looking or viewing for a property?
So 6 months ago is my short answer, and the reason I say that is, a transfer takes 3 months generally, so 90 days for property from offer to purchase to bond approval and then actual transfer into your name. But the problem is for example, end of January is now 3 months away, so that really covers the transfer period. But you don't want to be under pressure to buy. You don't want to be in a position where emotionally making bad decisions. You want to be in a position to make a decision based on the property suits your needs. The property is affordable. It's a good quality property. It's located where you need it to be located. It provides the amenities that you need. So you need to, because properties are such expensive purchases, it surprises me how often people make emotional decisions around such big purchases. It's the single biggest purchase you make in your entire life, and people make very, very snap decisions on it. So if you want to move in January, you should have been looking already. If January is a deadline for you for whatever reason, maybe get a 6-month lease and take another 6 months and find the property that suits your needs perfectly. And just to add to that, research the area you want to go into, understand the space you want to go into. Again, I'm very surprised how many people understand the latest brand of sneakers, when it's going to be released, what the ins and outs of the technology are, but they couldn't tell you a thing about a property. Yet a property will cost them, 100,000 times more than a pair of sneakers ever will. So yeah, it's important that you spend your time research, understand what you're buying, and really just take your time. Don't make an emotional decision.
As you're saying, some people know more about a brand of sneakers. I actually thought of course, the line that dropped today, which was Beyonce's Ivy Park drop 2, but we're not going to get into that one because I think a lot of us saw a lot of flames earlier today with that particular drop. I've got a really great question here that is, let me see which one I actually, this is the one. This one is from Uhlengiwe Giane, who asks, what is the reason for the same house to have different prices on sale when it's advertised and with different agents? I love this question. I mean, I know why, but please do let our viewers know why that would be the case. Same house, different prices, different agents.
So, you can take it from two perspectives. First one is that the agents, that the two agents are operating at different commission levels, and the owner has decided that they want an X in their pocket at the end of the day. So they'll say, I want $1 million, you add your commission on top, and one agent will go and add 50,000, the other agents will add 70,000, and that'll be the difference. Part two, the other side, is that the agent that's got it at a lower price has potentially just made the owner realize that the property isn't maybe worth what they wanted, and for them to get more feet through the door, that they need to market it at a lower level, and they just haven't let the second agency know, for example. And the third one, which is the one that I don't really like, is that the second agent marketing the property at a lower level is doing so without the owner's consent, but is trying to get people through the door with the view that I just need to get an offer and the owner will accept that offer, which is obviously unethical. So varying reasons why. And what I would say to you is just make sure that the agent that you're dealing with is firstly properly registered. There's no guarantee that they're ethical, but firstly properly registered, and then that they maybe are, when you're dealing with them, you just get a good gut feel about how they're doing things. If they're rushing you into a transaction, if they're not disclosing everything clearly, if they're not providing all documentation, maybe take a step away from that, and you can't go via another agent, but maybe take a look at another property.
Grant, we're going to go for a quick break, and when we come back, we'll be going through more of your questions and comments at home about planning ahead when it comes to your property purchase. So if certainly do have any questions or along those lines, do send them through to us. I have been seeing some of the questions that are coming in from our Facebook page. We'll certainly be going through them after this break. I'll also be sharing, and I'll pose it also to Grant before we wrap up our conversation, any final tips for people who are looking at buying. I know a lot of people are going onto the private property website and trying to find different properties to buy, and sometimes it could just be your first property. You want to go from renting to finally owning, and it may have been something that you've been planning on doing, and you're now at a place where you feel confident enough to essentially make that next step because you've been watching the show. You have a sense of what are some of the expectations, what are some of the things that you need to do, and how the process is essentially going to be like. We're going to go for a quick break, and we'll be back just after this. Welcome back to the Private Property Podcast with myself, Zama. It's the Friday edition of the Private Property Podcast, and this evening we're looking at simple tips on planning ahead for your property purchase. I'm joined by Smee, who's a director at Epic South Africa. We are taking your questions and comments when it comes to tips, when it comes to your property purchase. Perhaps there've been certain things that you were able to do early on in your property buying journey that you'd like to share with the community. Do send them through. We've been getting quite a number of your questions that we're going to go through. We asked you this on our Facebook page earlier on around some of the questions that you want us to cover that was going to assist you on your own home buying journey. And I actually want to come to this one, Grant, which is coming from let's see which one I'll go for. I like this one because I think it confuses quite a lot of us sometimes. It's coming from Ungobelo Genuka, who asks, what are the additional costs required besides the actual property cost, and how much do they typically amount to?
Sure. So a really good question. So in terms of actually purchasing the property, there's going to be three costs outside of the deposit that you need to be aware of. The first one is your transfer costs, which is, as the buyer, you are responsible for the cost of the attorney that is going to be processing that transfer. Now, normally that transfer attorney is selected by the seller, but you do have the ability to choose them as a buyer, just a side note. The second one is if you do have a bond, you're going to have to pay bond transfer costs. Now, that is the cost of the attorneys representing the bank in the transaction. So you'll have two sets of attorney costs. You'll have the transfer fees and the bond transfer fees. And the last one is if you're above the 1 million rand mark, you're going to be incurring transfer duty, which is the government tax on the purchase of property. So those are the three immediate costs that you're going to experience before you even get those keys.
Mm-hmm. And that's actually a question that a number of the viewers asked in different iterations, Grant. I see that Ukirupetsi Mash also asked a similar question. And I like their example because they're saying when buying a house that is priced for, let's say, 1.5 million, are there going to be any hidden costs when one buys that property, or is the person going to pay exactly 1.5 million rands only? And, as you're saying, Grant, and I think you can go at this one, because I like that he even put a figure on it, and it's above 1 million.
Yeah. So I mean, the easiest way to do it, and I have it on my phone, is I've actually downloaded the Uber app, so the OOBA app, Uber app, and on that Uber app, there's a calculator there. So when you're looking at a property, you can actually go punch in the figures, and it tells you exactly what the transfer duty is going to be, as well as the estimation on the transfer costs and the bond transfer costs. So I have that app there available. So yeah, I mean, I know the idea of hidden is sort of sounds like something sort of secretive. And the reality is just costs that people are unaware of because they haven't been through the process before. But it's the transfer costs, both sets of transfer costs, and the bond transfer costs, and then the transfer duty are the costs you're going to incur. I mean, there's so many costs associated with ownership, because when you move into the property, there's going to be maintenance costs, there's going to be moving costs, there's lots of other sort of peripheral costs associated with owning a property. But at the offset, those are the three.
And I want to actually echo what Grant was saying, that do download the Uber app. You can even go onto the private property website website where you're able to get that calculator, because it really gives you a good sense of what you should be putting aside. So suppose you want to put down a deposit, so you be able to put it down, let's say your 10% deposit. If you want to, then you're also going to be able to get an estimation of how much you're going to pay for the bond registration attorneys, the transferring attorneys, and if, of course, the property is above 1 million, also what is going to be in transfer duty, because those are monies that you're going to need upfront. The property is not going to be registered if transfer duty isn't paid, if the attorney fees aren't being paid. So that's money that you will essentially need over and above whatever the bank, because it's essentially the bank that's going to be granting you the facility. So the bank is going to move the money from their account effectively to the seller. So just have a good sense of how much cash on hand you are going to need by using those calculators, and essentially just start saving towards them. Because I think the moment you now have that amount, then you're able to start working towards saving towards them. And there's actually a question that was similar to these questions, which is about the other costs, Grant. And this one is coming from Anne Lingham, who asks, how do I obtain rates and tax and utility bills if the agent refuses to share? Is the agent not supposed to tell you the truth pertaining to plumbing and aging of direct, and essentially answering your direct questions when it comes to the utility bills?
Yes, I mean, absolutely. You know, when I'm looking at a property, I request an estimation of those bills. So generally, the agent doesn't have those available, but I often ask for a copy of the latest bill to take a look at exactly what the costs relating to the property are. Now, rates and taxes, you know, if you know the area pretty well, you know, rates and taxes don't vary property to property that much. But the one that I'm very wary of personally is when you're looking at sectional title schemes, looking at the levy statements. So I need to understand exactly what is the levy, what's included in the levy, what's not included in the levy. And the big one, which has hit so many people, is there a special levy currently, or is there a special levy coming? So instead of only looking at rates and taxes, you're looking at rates and tax bills, levy bills, as well as AGM minutes, any SGMs, so special general meetings that have been recently. And to be honest, if you can get access to it, even trustee minutes, because the trustees might be in a trustee meeting planning some major works, and that hasn't been declared or declared at any general meetings yet. So you want to know that that's coming up.
We've got a question here on our Facebook page coming from Utandega Silangwe, who asks, I'm planning on switching my banking from Standard Bank to FNB, and I want to buy next year. Will this affect my bond application? So switching your banking right now, this is your primary bank, will it affect your home loan application?
So your home loan application is evidence-based. So as long as you can prove with the evidence you have, whether it's banking with Standard Bank or ABSA or anybody, or if you've moved accounts, you can provide the evidence that for a period of time you're receiving your salary into your Standard Bank account, and then the next 6 months into your ABSA account, and you can show that track record, that paper trail, then that shouldn't affect your bond application. Where it might is some banks do require that you bank with them for certain instances. But I think that's very, very rare these days, particularly with the banks at the moment are very, very keen for business. You know, what people need to understand, particularly for first-time buyers, is the banks are so hungry for your business that you have this ability, you have the ability to get finance far easier than pretty much ever before. And also the negotiation points earlier, the first-time buyers are probably the strongest position to negotiate if you have a couple of offers from banks at the moment.
I mean, I absolutely found that you're able to get a home loan facility from the bank that isn't your primary bank. And you're able to typically get this again when you work with a bond originator. Even when you don't work with a bond originator, it certainly helps when you work with a bond originator because they go to all the banks on your behalf at once. So you don't have to be banking with a particular bank in order to access a home loan facility with that specific bank. So it typically wouldn't affect your application, Tandega. So all the best for your application next year. And of course, if you have any questions along the way, do drop us a message and we'll certainly be sure to answer your question. Grant, we've got one here from Entle Beauty that says, good evening. My question is, what are the most important things to look for when viewing a house? And secondly, does the seller have to disclose everything that may be faulty with the house, or is it up to the buyer to have an inspector or an inspection to view it thoroughly? Is this something that's up to the seller? And what if they do not disclose everything? Then what happens? I love this question. It's such
quite a question. Okay. So what's the most important thing to look for in property? First and foremost is you want to be sure that when you're looking, it's in the location and the area that you want. So first and foremost. Secondly, when you're attending a property, you're going to be looking for any structural issues or structural defects, particularly any cracking or cracks that might be appearing. Now, you've got to be able to distinguish between the surface crack and structural issues, but that'll be secondary. Look for water damage. Water damage is the one that you want to look for, particularly around ceiling corners, because that's going to show a leaking roof. But you know, you're not expected to be an expert when you are buying a property. So go through, request a defect list from the agent, and that's all defects that are disclosed by the seller. The seller needs to disclose everything that they know of. So it's a requirement that they do that. And but just realize that a seller won't know everything. They won't know, for example, there might be rusting in the roof truss or along the roof joints and trusses or something. So, because they don't go into the roof that often. So you can't pick that all up. If you do and are able to have budgets and spend the extra 2,000 Rand on your single biggest purchase of your entire life. So just sort of, let's frame it there. You know, you're spending between 500, 600, a million Rand sometimes. It's your first biggest purchase. Spend 2,000 Rand or 3,000 Rand and get a property inspector out. Get them to take a look at the property and get a report. That puts you in a position that you have certainty around the condition of the property, firstly, but also gives you a negotiation tool if there are issues that you can highlight to the seller, saying, look, you now know about these issues because they're here, they are in this report, and therefore, you know, I'm going to negotiate the price with you. So I'm a big fan of property inspectors. I think there's massive value. Expert property inspectors, you know, there are a lot more these days than there have been in the past. So I would certainly, if you have the ability to get an inspector in, absolutely.
We've got a great question here from Shalene Russell, who asks, who selects the transfer conveyances, buyer or seller? And in brackets, she wrote in KZN. And I put that out there because there's no difference really in which province you're in. So Grant, 2 points then.
So it's common practice that the seller does, and estate agents will generally say to you that the seller must and will do that. So, and that's, like I said, it's common practice. It's not, there's no legal requirement that it does. So a more sophisticated buyer, investment buyers, certainly make sure that they select the transfer attorney themselves. It's for various reasons, you know, certainty around who's holding your money, control of the transaction. So, you know, remembering when you put
sometimes
a deposit
it's even
down,
about being able to work with somebody you've worked with, and also somebody who already gives you probably a discount on the transfer.
Exactly.
So
You're the one paying. So you know, you know, so it's a better discount. So you know, I would say to you that if you can, and willing to put into the offer to purchase, that put the offer in, but make sure that you are selecting the conveyancing attorney as the buyer. It's at your cost, and it's at your, so it should be at your you know, your option or your choice, your preference.
I'm going to put this as the last question, Grant. Is coming from Ukensani Manzini, who asks, what is a bank sale? And also, can you sell your property to a bank even if you finished with your bond payment?
Okay, so the second answer is probably not. I'd be very surprised. The banks aren't in the business of owning property. And what is a bank sale? So a bank sale is so when you buy a property and you get a bond on that property that gets registered against the deed at the deeds office, you then need to pay that bond for a period of 20 years. If you stop paying, the bank will send you a notification of breach, and they will then take you to court and require that you sell your property to make good on that loan. That's the first level. The second level then is that if that property doesn't sell, the bank will then buy that property and sell it at auction to try and recover as much money against the bond they can, and that's your repossession, so your auctions. So bank sale is generally speaking is when the bank has bought or taken possession of your property and is reselling that to try and settle the bond that you have defaulted on. So it's that last step. So you get your easy sell, fast sell properties from FNB and ABSA. Those are when people are in trouble and they've been or the court has told them they need to sell the property. The owner of the property who's paying the bond is still the owner. And then once they have been unable to sell their property, the bank then buys it at the first auction and it becomes a repossessed property, which they then resell as a bank property.
Grant, before I let you go, and you get started on your weekend, any other final tips for viewers at home who are looking at buying, you know, that whether it's their first or second property, and just making sure that they're adequately planned for the process that lies ahead for them?
Yeah, I think, you know, take your time is the first one, and I said it earlier, don't be emotional about buying, but I think the big one that I'd really like to encourage people to do is don't buy to the end of your budget. So, you know, allocate about 30% of your monthly budget to the cost. But even if you can, try and find a property that maybe is slightly cheaper, slightly smaller, or negotiate well, and take that extra budget. So let's use an example, 15,000 Rand a month. That's what you're earning. You've allocated 5,000 Rand to a bond. Find a property where the bond's 4,000 Rand and pay the 5,000 Rand into the bond a month, and do that. You know, any extra money you make, pay it into the bond. Don't get a bigger property. Cut down on luxuries and put it into your property, and kill your bond as fast as possible. You know, bring your bond down to 10 years instead of 20 years. you'll be very, very surprised at the next step. Once that you take advantage of the capital value of the property paid off, and you don't have a bond, you'll be able to get a superb property or a very nice upgrade in 10 years' time. So I think really don't go to the last cent of your budget. Try and have some buffer in there and put that into your bond to pay it off as quick as possible.
I mean, I even say, if possible, you actually want to even aim to be paying off your primary residence in about 6-7 years. It takes quite a lot of discipline, but it's pretty possible. And when you realize how much you save in interest, it's shocking. I mean, I have an exercise, I have a model where I look at all the properties and you look at all the additional amounts you're putting in and how many months you keep shaving off the respective properties. And it's actually just unbelievable how much money you're able to shave off bit by bit, even with adding something as low as an extra, 200 Rand or 500 Rand.
Yeah.
It's
not a lot of money. Then people think it's thousands. It's not a lot of money. It's just a little bit extra helps. It goes a long way.
Yeah. And so, Grant, we're certainly going to leave it there this evening. Thank you so much for joining us. It's always so great to have a chat with you. I'm certainly going to be inviting you again. And I always say this when we speak, because I think it is quite an insightful conversation and quite a lot to think about for people who are on their home loan journey. I think sometimes you're feeling a bit scared and you're still not quite certain. It's always great to be able to get the right answers the first time around so that you can avoid making those mistakes that are going to cost you money. So thank you so much for joining us this evening.
Absolute pleasure. Thank you.
And that is Grant Smee, who's the director at Epic South Africa. And that then brings us to the end of the Private Property Podcast with myself, Zama Khumalo. And to wrap up the week, I know that I promised you, something this week. I haven't forgotten. The team is still just ironing out a few things where that is concerned. So don't worry, I haven't forgotten about you. I'll still be sharing the good news in due time. And I'm still working on that good giveaway, because I think we're going to end off sort of note. So we're certainly working on a good giveaway that we can give away across our social media platforms. So the top fan gangs across the board must really keep engaging. We are going to find a way to reward the people who engage with us regularly, but also the platform that, of course, gives us the most engagement. Well, that's it from me, Zama Khumalo. Hoping you have yourselves a great weekend. Of course, this weekend you can tune into the Developers Show with Chad on Saturday and Sunday at 1 o'clock, and you'll get to see some of the best estates and complexes that the country has on offer. And if that's something that you're in the market for, then it's certainly something that you do not want to miss out. Until then, I'm back on your screens on Monday evening at 7 o'clock, hoping you're staying home and staying safe.
Hi, I'm Khumutsapoy, and I'm an entrepreneur from Soweto. Soweto's come a long way, from a small township to a mini city of its own. Soweto's got some really, really nice suburbs, like Deep Kloof Extension, but the locals call it Deep Kloof Expensive. Orlando is known as the suburb that had the first brick houses built in Soweto. Orlando Stadium for its iconic games between Kaizer Chiefs and Pirates. And most importantly, Vilakazi Street, where Nelson Mandela and Desmond Tutu resided. To the west of Soweto, you find suburbs of Dobsonville and Protea. These two suburbs are actually very cosmopolitan, fresh, young, and very new. Right next door to Soweto, we have a neighboring suburb, which is Eldorado Park. For a little adventure and a little fun, Soweto's got so many night spots, from the News Cafe at Mamponya Mall, to your Vilakazi Streets at Kumzi's, to just chilling at Chafpozi just between the towers and having a simple braai vleis chisanyama. Something very close to my heart is actually seeing people move back into Soweto, growing businesses, remodeling homes. It merely says to us that Soweto is a growing city. There's way more to this place than what we think. Soweto needs to be discovered daily. I'm so proud to call Soweto my home, and this is my neighborhood.